It's not true. He has an imbalanced Mars.
Yeah.
Because the person who is truly strong, the person who has a strong Mars knows that they can handle any problem. They don't need to go out and prove it to others by picking on others, by being aggressive. They're the quiet one that sits on the couch, that is strong, that knows if someone busts in their door, all they got to do is, like, you know, pull out their martial arts or go grab their gun and deal with the situation.
Yeah.
They're not trying to act tough and let everyone know that they're tough.
Yeah.
And Mars, in regards to how it functions in our life as that which improves us, it's not simply about competition or necessarily always getting to the purest ideal. Mars, along with Saturn, are those two planets that allow us to know that, number one, with Saturn, that whatever comes our way, even if we get utterly massacred, we're still going to get up the next day and carry on.
Yeah.
And Mars is the planet that says, no matter what odds come at us, we are either going to have the skills to deal with it, or even if we lose, you see, this is the thing. A good Mars, a balanced Mars, even if a balanced Mars loses, does not flip out, does not blow up, does not lose it. What they do is they stop and they say, what did I do wrong? And how can I fix that next time?
Exactly. And they're graceful. They shake the winner's hand.
Right. Because they appreciate the competition. And you know, even if we think about the animal kingdom, there is this respect amongst the alpha through the rest of the chain of whatever it might be with animals. Mm. And you know, humans are no different. We're animals as well. The person who has a prominent, strong, healthy Mars, they will respect someone who's stronger and more skillful than them.
Yes.
They may still challenge them because they want to get better and they want to be like that eventually too, but they're not going to hold it against them. They're not going to be, you know, difficult about it. They see someone who is great. I was just watching a movie. There's a series of books called, I think it's called the Richard Sharp series. And it's about almost like Civil War type era things. And the story is about a soldier. And in this particular movie I was watching about the book, the soldier he rose up through the ranks. He was an orphan. He became this wonderful officer. And at this story, all he wanted to do, he wanted to see Napoleon. Even though he was on the other side of the army, he respected the prowess of Napoleon. He respected the prowess of his enemies so much that they were fighting, but there was that sense of respect there.
Yeah, that's interesting. Wow.
You know, and Mars has that. When Mars is good, Mars is respectful. You know, Mars is definitely respectful. It's not the difficult rebel that's just trying to make problems. That's an imbalanced Mars. You see, so Mars, there's a lot of
without a war.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've met people like that. People whose Marses were imbalanced, aspecting the ascendant. Also with the spike yoga, I'm thinking about somebody in particular had all the planets in 3 signs and Mars aspecting the ascendant in Taurus, whereas in a Venus sign. And I always thought that she was like somebody who was a soldier without a war.
Right.
A warrior without a war, because she seemed to need that kind of interaction with people, you know, that abrasiveness. And understanding it, you know, because I was an astrologer, so I could see what was going on with her. But I can't say that it was still, that understanding it made it okay. It was just easier to deal with.
Right.
Yeah, Mars is restraint, too, the ability to restrain himself. Okay, so Mars is also, let me see, strength of character. So that's what we've been talking about.
You know, one important thing while you're thinking about that,
okay,
when we think about character in Mars, and you're talking about astrology and like seeing that the person's Mars where it was in the chart and how it didn't quite make it better, but it helped you understand them. That can be very useful, particularly in things like relationship counseling. Because if you're working with 2 people and you see one of them has this very difficult Mars and they're not willing to work on it, you can be very clear to tell the opposite partner, this person is probably going to find and cause a lot of problems. Yeah. And if you're aware of that and you're accepting and loving of that from the get-go, well, everything's fine. But if you think that things are going to change or that this person is going to become less difficult in a Martian way just because, or that the understanding from the astrological session will give that, that's not the case. So whether or not something in a chart brings a change, if you can communicate to the client or whoever you're talking to just simply what the reality of this might be if the person isn't actively trying to improve upon it, that can be helpful as well, because it allows them to kind of let go of any false hope or fantastic notions of how it might go.
This is true. Also, give them a lot of problems. Give them problems to solve.
Right. Yes.
Things to do. Give them things to do. Break things if you have to, so that they can fix them.
Yeah.
Now, but that brings me to Mars and Venus, and how when Venus is aspecting Mars or involved with Mars in some way, what would you have to say about that?
Well, with Mars and Venus, there's a reason that is kind of a good combination. It's a good combination in the sense that for the Mars, what that means is that when it comes to a challenge, when it comes to something that they're seeking or an ideal they're working towards, that Venus will tend to give them fulfillment after they do the hard work.
Yeah.
Which is a good thing, because if you've just got Mars and there's no fulfillment, well, it's just like one problem after another, and where's the rest? And Venus is that rest, that rejuvenation. One of the difficulties with Mars and Venus is that it can make a person hyper-focused on striving for things or fixing things, such that there's always a sense of luxury or ease. So that can give a kind of mentality where the person is always like looking for, in a sense, I don't want to say the next best thing, because that's not quite right. It gives them a passion that's hard to fulfill. Because they're going to tend to possibly find problems with the fulfillment that they get. Like they do something, they get the fulfillment, and they sit around and think, well, that wasn't quite exactly it. So therefore, let me go out and go for something new. Let me go out to new land. So it's great for the passion of it, but it can be distracting if there are other things in your life that you want to be accomplishing.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, so I was going to say something. Now I forgot what it was. It went away. Oh, in terms of enlightenment. Since Venus is the planet of being able to see meaning where there is none, finding meaning in symbols, the planet of prophecy, he is one of the planets that loves knowledge, even for its own sake.
Right.
When you get that together with Mars, what would you have to say about that?
Well, eventually the person is probably going to have to let go of their attachment to that. And that could take a while to describe, because, for example, in the Yoga Sutras, which is a Kriya Yoga text, and also just a text really wonderful for anyone practicing yogic meditation, in the final, as you go through the process of what the Yoga Sutras described, it says that eventually one also has to transcend the sattvic state. So there's the idea of being tamasic and kind of overcoming problems. There's the idea of the rajasic energy, which is becoming greater, understanding sort of this temporal manifestation. And then there's the sattvic state, where it's just pure inspiration. That's often considered to be the blissful state. And in a lot of these texts, the idea is that for enlightenment to be complete, one must also go beyond that attachment to that sense of bliss and inspiration. And one of the highest teachings in the Bhagavad Gita is the idea that the yogi, or the person on this enlightenment path, is entitled to action only, not the fruits of their actions.
Yeah,
and so Mars is wrapped up all in that, because Mars is action. So when we have this Mars-Venus combination together, it is very good for the spiritual path, but it is going to require that eventually they need to go back and understand, because why does Venus do things? Venus is about doing things that lead to higher fulfillment. So with Venus, there is a sense of, I do this, therefore something greater happens. And if we take that phrase, the yogi is entitled to action only, not the fruits of their action, the focus on fulfillment is not there. It's just simply life happens through you, and you are not defining yourself by the fruits of what you do. And that's a mind twister in and of itself, which is why meditation is so important. But with the Venus-Mars combination, there may often be an over-attachment to doing things for greater fulfillment, when really it is the mind that wants to be fulfilled, because life itself is always fulfilled. It's always happening. It's in that pure action beyond fulfillment that Mars is so important.
Well, that's an unexpected answer. And it makes perfect sense, though. It does.
Okay.
You know, the problem is, even sitting here talking to you, I'm having a hard time. I get an idea. I'm like, oh, yeah, ask him about that. And then it goes out of my mind.
You need a pen.
I need more meditation, obviously. Okay, so Jupiter and Mars, they're friends. And when you were talking about that pure inspiration thing, it made me think of the Jupiter-Mars combination, and how that can lead to wealth.
Right.
Not just worldly wealth, but other kinds of wealth too. Mm-hmm. And the difference is that Mars looks up and Jupiter looks all around, mm-hmm. through wisdom and philosophy and that sort of thing. Does that spark off anything for you?
Yeah, with Jupiter is a very different energy than Venus. They're both Brahman caste, and so they both tend to have a similar kind of sort of a similar direction. It's just the great thing about Jupiter is that Jupiter allows the person to actually accept or feel or experience the bigger picture without having to define it through things. That's why Venus is considered to be the guru of the Asheras, which are the worldly forces, or what they call the demonic forces, because those are about things. Those are about like gaining and loss. It's things that you can touch or experience. Whereas Jupiter is the guru of the Devas, and the Devas are not necessarily meant to be defined by things. So with the Mars Jupiter combination, that tends to work very well in a person's life because it gives them the expansiveness to have faith in their actions, right? That's the beautiful thing. Where Mars and Venus come together, there is a sense of, I'm doing this, I'm fixing this to get A, B, or C. But when you have Jupiter, which is a sense of delight and freedom and happiness, Mars is action, Jupiter is delight and happiness, then you have the delight simply in the action. Which actually takes you back to that phrase, the yogi is entitled to action only, not the fruits of their action. So with Jupiter and Mars, then the action itself becomes the bliss. And there's no need to project into a future or to project into something fulfilling you later. It's the doing that actually makes it work.
That makes a lot of sense. For many years, I was involved in 12-step programs. Mm-hmm. And one of the sayings that they had there was, do the footwork and leave the results to God, mm-hmm. which is, I guess, a quick way of saying the same thing.
Yes.
And also thinking about Mars is our courage and our will. And one of the most prominent things about any 12-step program, no matter what they're focusing on, is the serenity prayer.
Right.
Which is, grant me the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference.
Exactly.
And, there's the word will is used in there too. So let me see if I can remember this. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Okay, mm-hmm. I guess the will is not in there. But in the 12-step program, the 12 steps themselves, one of them directly says where you turn your will over to the higher power as you understand that higher power. Mm-hmm. And to me, it's like fixing a Mars
right.
that may be gone astray, is being used on the wrong things.
Right.
Right. And especially, like, I started off in Al-Anon. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that you learn in Al-Anon, one of the very first things you learn in Al-Anon is to mind your own business.
Right.
To not use your will trying to fix your alcoholic's problem. Mm-hmm. Because you can't. It's their problem. And you can only work on your own self. And it's so amazing how that works. And it takes a lot of courage to do it. Mm-hmm. Speaking of courage. Because, going that deeply into yourself, like, one of the things that you have to do is the 4th step, which is what everybody dreads. That's where you take a fearless moral inventory of yourself. And they've got these worksheets that you can do. And I'm telling you, those worksheets, there's things you've never even thought of before. And they're like, oh, yeah, that too. That's true. And you get this whole fearless moral inventory, right? That means you're using your Mars. And then you have to have the courage to do step 5, which is to basically talk about, share this thing with another human being in the presence of the divine as you understand it. So one of the things that I think, and I'm not sure because I haven't investigated everything, but it seems like every spiritual tradition or practice, they have some version of that. Now, what would you say about that when it comes to like meditation in particular, as leading to self-knowledge and learning how to mind your own business and all that stuff?
Well, the mind your own business is a very important thing. For example, I am not a fan of organizations. I'm not a fan of meditation groups. And everyone says, well, why not? They're just wonderful things. And I don't think they are. And that's why, for the Kriya Yoga apprenticeship program, it is individual, meaning aside from once a year when we come together to meditate on a week-long retreat, I don't want you talking to all your friends about your meditation. I don't want you doing those things. I want you to do your own work. I want you to focus on what is important to you. Because having been involved in meditation groups, having led a meditation center, what I see people doing is they're showing up for community. They're showing up for, to be with people of a like mind, which in and of itself, I have absolutely no problem with. I go and I play music with people. I go play pickleball with people. I go to groups to have community and to do things with them. So when it comes to enlightenment and meditation, though, the more input you have from people who don't know what they're talking about, the worse off you are. So when you get a bunch of people together in a group who don't know really how to meditate and they all start talking, that's like bringing together 15 people who don't know how to build a house. And like, well, how do we build a house? Well, let's talk about it. Let's figure it out. And in the end, all you've got is a shack that's about ready to fall apart.
Right.
So with Mars in meditation spirituality, what I have found is that when people are able to tap into their Mars, that gives them the motivation to whether they go to it, that gives them the motivation to get up and meditate. That gives them the motivation to read their spiritual texts, whether anyone else is doing it or not. It's like the person who's very Martian who wants to be in shape. Yeah. They get up and they run every morning. They don't talk to anyone about it. They eat the right foods because for them, they want to grow into something better and greater, if this makes sense.
Yeah, it totally does. Yes.
So the idea of the spiritual path being a solitary path, that tends to make more sense to an individual with a stronger Mars, because the stronger Mars wants to get to it. He wants to get in there and train and make oneself better. It doesn't care about whether their friends are doing it. It doesn't care about whether there's a group to go to who's also talking about doing it. So Mars is very important in that it tends to give a person that direct drive that whether anyone else is doing it or not, the individual is still going to seek it out and explore it for themselves.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. I had a girlfriend who she liked to run. Mm-hmm. That's what she liked to do, no matter what. And so she was the one I'd want to run with because I knew that she was going to do it whether I was there or not.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's the same. It's the same for meditation. And again, I'm not saying I have any issue with groups. And so when I tell people when they ask me about community, I said, look, don't worry about spiritual community because really that might be helpful in the very beginning, but most of the time what happens is that's just your way of trying to validate your own choice to follow a path. Yeah. And if you're going to follow a path, you will do much better if you don't need the validation of someone else. So meditate on your own, talk to your spiritual mentor. But if you need a community to hang out with, join meetup.com and find someone with similar interests and go build puzzles or play chess or find your community in something that is meant to be communally based. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I don't know. Don't you think some people might need that help at first?
At first, in the beginning, yes. I completely agree.
Accountability thing, that whole accountability thing.
Yeah.
Because people are expecting you to be there. Not because you're going to do anything once you're there, except be in your own head.
Right.
Anyway.
No, you're right. And
Yeah.
but there's a difference long term. Meaning, what I see a lot of people doing is they're saying, I'm interested in spirituality, but really what they're interested in is having tea and cookies and talking with people after the meditation group.
Right. That's a totally different thing.
It's a totally different thing. And if that's the way it is for the first year or two, no problem. It's getting you, kind of, you're coming together, you're meeting. But if that's something that 40 years later, that's what your motivation is, then one needs to take that self-inventory that you're talking about and ask yourself, well, was my motivation really to explore spirituality and meditation, or was I just lonely and I wanted to hang out with some people that, like to talk about the same kind of things I like to talk about? Again, no problem with that, but it's about being honest with oneself about what one's true motivation is.
Right, right. So what do you think of Saturn being involved with this? Like if you have Saturn with Mars, opposing Mars, aspecting Mars.
That can go either way, because on one hand, I've said this many times before, that when I've had people working for me, either doing a job or taking the weight off by answering emails for me or doing things like that, if I look at their chart and they've got a prominent Saturn Mars, that's the person I'm going to hire. Why? Because I know that, number one, they're probably way too hard on themselves about getting things done well, which means that they're probably going to do a really good job.
Yes.
So when I look for people who I want to see get things done because they want to see it done right, I look for that. The problem with that Saturn Mars, though, on a personal level, is that it can drive a person too hard, and it can burn out that Mars, and it can make a person have too high expectations for themselves and end up injuring themselves psychically, psychologically, just through burnout alone. So the Saturn Mars